Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's fact. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome to episode 140 of the Last Round Podcast. No Danny Z today. Subbed him out and brought in Yahoo Sports' Kevin Iole. Thanks for joining me, Kevin.
You got it, Michael. Appreciate it.
So we'll dive straight into it. It's kind of a lot to touch on. So last week, diving into the fight reviews, Saturday the 14th from Matchroom's HQ, Essex on DAZN. We'll start at the top and work our way down. So Joshua Buatsi moved to 15-0 with a TKO 11 over, I think it's pronounced Ricards Bolotniks. Kevin, what did you think of his performance and what did you think of Buatsi so far? I think the general consensus is he hasn't moved as fast as people had expected.
You know, I like him I tweeted out, I like him as a fighter, and I thought he gave a pretty good performance in the fight and getting the finish. I couldn't understand how Bolotnik was staying up, you know, late in the fight. I mean, he's taking some big shots and, I thought Buatsi looked like a guy that's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the not too distant future. You know, I mean, obviously the level of competition is going to go up, and you know he made a few mistakes, but I think overall I liked him, and I think he's a guy that has a chance to be a factor.
You think the change in trainer to Virgil Hunter was a good idea for him?
You know, I mean, I think of the fights of his that I have seen, I thought that was the best that he looked, right? Virgil was a real interesting guy, right? I mean, if he has the right athlete, you know, he can make you look incredible. But not everybody, you know, Virgil's not for everybody because not everybody can do the things that, you know, that he wants you to do. But I thought he looked, you know, really good. And I thought he looked, you know, you saw some of the touches of Virgil in there. But I don't think, I would not say he's a finished product, right? And so I think the jury's still out on the long run of the work between the two of them. But I was impressed, you know, overall with what he did, and I kind of feel like you know, he seems like a guy that's receptive to coaching, and you know, that's a good start with Virgil because you know Virgil's going to overhaul a lot of what you do. And you know, when you go into with a training situation like that, and you're going to change a lot of what you do, you know, you have to be receptive to coaching and be willing, you know, make that commitment to make a change, in my opinion.
From what a lot of people have said in the business that have watched his fight so far, I do wonder if it's maybe just the level of the opponent that he's faced so far. He tends to eat a shot to give one or two. And I do wonder once he steps up to the next level, you know, Eddie Hearn said several times, try to get him out November, December, then hopefully face someone like Bivol later next year. Do you think he'll come unstuck if that's the same, you know, tendency that he tends to keep, you know, taking a shot to land one or two? Because obviously at the higher ends of that division, you're going to face some heavy-handed fighters. Yeah,
and I mean, you know, when you're in the high end of pro boxing, no matter what division you're in, you know, you cannot, you know, trade. And that's always a scary proposition, you know. And I look at this guy and I think, you know, if that is his weakness, then going with a trainer like Virgil, who knows how to, you know, teach to make those adjustments and avoid that kind of problem and everything, is a very good choice. You know, I sometimes think that, you know, people, they don't take their own situation into account, you know, what type of athlete they are when they hire their trainer. They just go, oh, so-and-so had success with, you know, so-and-so, and then they go there. I think you have to look at a fighter and say, you know, look at a trainer and say, okay, who has he worked with in the past, and do they have attributes similar to me? And is he going to be able to bring, you know, those out? Like Emmanuel Stewart was a guy that he really could work with a lot of different types of fighters and different styles of fighters. And he would add to their games without, detracting. But there's not a lot of guys out there, in my opinion, like that, right? And I think, so it's horses for courses. Right. And, I like the guy. I like him as a fighter. Virgil proved with a number of fighters, but certainly with Andre Ward, that he's as good as there is when he has the right horse in the race. And so, I think it was an encouraging return first time out.
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to move him on a little bit quicker because he was the 2012 batch, if I remember rightly, of the Olympics. And, I think he was, a bronze medalist and one of the stars. And obviously Lawrence Okoli, I think, went out in the first or second round and he's already a world champion. So, when they both turned pro, everyone was kind of like, oh, Buatsi's going to be, a light heavyweight champion. He's unreal. And Lawrence Okoli was kind of just in the background. But, he's just been managed really, really well. And just
I wrote something on Lawrence in the Olympics and in Rio that year. I was down there, and I liked, for whatever reason, I saw something in Lawrence down in Rio, and I liked him, and I just said, hey, people should keep an eye on this guy because I like him. So I was happy when I saw he won a world title, just because he was a guy that nobody had come up to me and said, watch this guy or whatever. I went into the Olympics and saw him fight and said, hey, I like this guy, and he's interesting, and I was happy to see him win.
It's going to be interesting when he turns, eventually moves up to heavyweight because of the size that he is. And he just keeps everything very simple, does the basics very well.
Yeah, I think, now you look at some of the heavyweights that are out there and, size is a really big issue, right? And I mean, you cannot, size is an issue for everybody when you're talking Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, and Anthony Joshua, right? 6'6", 6'7", 6'9", and at least two of the three of them, are pretty good to very good boxers, right? I mean, Deontay nobody would consider him a great boxer, but yeah, I think that is. That's something, it's a concern for everybody going to the heavyweight division. It's like my concern about Usyk, right? I mean, I have Usyk in my pound for pound, and I thought for the longest time that Usyk would beat AJ. And then I saw him fight, I know there was another fight subsequent, but when I saw him fight Chaz Witherspoon, that really changed my mind because I thought, Chaz Witherspoon was totally shot, totally over the hill. And Witherspoon was giving him hell, and I thought was hurting him in the fight. And, it didn't look to me like Usyk was really hurting Witherspoon a lot. And Witherspoon was a guy that was there to be beaten. And imagine if AJ was fighting him that night, what would have happened to Chaz Witherspoon? So, and now Witherspoon, of course, is a big dude too. But I kind of was, that took me off that Usyk train. And Usyk what is Usyk, like 6'3", and he's like Muhammad Ali size. Right. He's not a small heavyweight, but so size is always going to be a factor.
Right. I think we're 5 weeks away from that fight, September 25th, I believe.
25th, yeah.
Yeah. Moving on that card, Michael Mickinson moved to 21-0, unanimous decision. I'm not going to attempt his first name. Runowski, who dropped to 19-2. Mickinson, not the greatest of styles, very unorthodox, throws punches from very odd angles, but it's effective. But I think he's going to come to the point where it's kind of like who really wants to tune in to watch him. I think he's got just a handful of knockouts in his 21 fights, but he's very intriguing to watch just because he's very different.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't know where he's going to come at you from, but a lot of times when you have guys that fight the way he fights, that they're oddly offensive because they're landing because the opponents don't know where everything's coming from. But he's kind of like well, not stylistically, but like Rigondeaux in this great economy of punches. He's not a guy that's going out there and throwing a ton of punches, and so. In that regard, in my opinion, he's not a guy that I think, like, for him to go higher in the world and accomplish more, you cannot have that limited skill set offense. I mentioned Rigondeaux, and I know we'll get to his fight in a second, but he has world-class boxing skills, and he's a guy that it's almost impossible to hit him when he doesn't want to be hit, and then can hit you back. Mickelson, I think, totally different character, right? And so you need more offense. And Rigondeaux's barely making it work, right? I mean, look at all the criticism that surrounds him. And so a guy like Mickelson, I think, you got to figure out a way to start, connecting more and start using, taking advantage of some of your advantages that you have going into these fights.
No, definitely. He's definitely needs to do something just to try to, it's the entertainment, and that's something that Rigondeaux's fallen foul on, obviously, when we touch on him on the next card. But moving on, Joe Cordina moved to 13-0, first round KO over Joshua Hernandez. Joe Cordina is someone I was very high on. I like him. I think he looks good. He's got got the first round KO in this fight, came out with the Olympics as well. How's he looked on over here, Kevin, in the US?
I did not see that fight, so that's when I didn't see him on Saturday. So that one I missed.
He had some problems with his hand, and then early on in the fight, you could see that he was kind of using his right hand, using the backhand, trying to connect. He threw it a couple of times, just missed. Caught him square on the chin. Good. So that TV knockout for him. Obviously, not good in terms of trying to get the rounds in, because I think that was something that they'd said in the interviews before. Right. Yeah, I think he's going to be a good prospect as long as he can kind of keep away from injuries and kind of move him a bit quicker now, which I think Eddie Hearn agreed that they're going to try to do, get him out 2 or 3 times hopefully this year.
And that's one thing that Eddie does, because Eddie's got a lot of cards and a lot of opportunities. Right. And if you want to fight, he's going to get you in there. So yeah, I think and Eddie understands, with younger fighters, the importance of that, getting guys, in the ring so they, they can develop, and because not everybody's on the same path, and a lot of times, we talk about, hey, this guy won a title in 3 years, and this guy is still searching for a title in 6 years, and I think it's the development path of everybody is different, and injuries are different, and they set you back a little bit, and so I think that Eddie's a good guy in that regard, because Eddie is going to have a lot of inventory and a lot of spots that if he wants to fight, he's going to be able to get those fights and get the development time that he needs.
It's funny when you're like, boxing nerds like us, and you're looking at the different cards from around the world, and you'll have like Matchroom Italy, and they'll just have like a random British name on there, or, Spain, Australia, which I think is another area they're going to try to move into. You just get these guys that are, owed fights, and they just end up on this, random card in, Rome or somewhere like that.
Eddie gets a lot of heat from people, and I don't understand it, because I think he puts on, Eddie is a guy that tries to make the biggest fight. So let's be honest, most of the boxing fans, they're watching the main event and the co-main event, and they're not watching up and down the card, right? And they're not looking at the smaller cards and everything. And so for them, Eddie's a guy that's every big fight he's trying to get made. He's pushing that. But he also has opportunity everywhere, and he's really committed to growing the sport and growing his brand, and helping DAZN grow. I think he's a clever guy, and I saw him I really paid attention at the Devin Haney fight in Las Vegas, and I watched how Eddie dealt with the media. Me, of course, being a member of the media, and I was just really, really impressed. He reminded me, and I said this of Dana White, 10, 12 years ago. Dana White used to sit there until every last person would have had all their questions answered, do you want to, and Eddie does that, and so that's good for the fighters too, because, when you have a promoter that does that, he can sing their praises, and he can do those things for the fighters and get them a little bit of, shine, and get people talking about them a little bit, and have that where, and it takes the pressure off them. They don't have to always be the ones talking. And, and Eddie has a name in the business now. And so people, will follow him and all that. And so I think, I don't understand, there's a lot of things about fans I don't understand, this garbage with Errol Spence, I don't understand. But, the hate that Eddie Hearn gets, I think Eddie Hearn is an #1 guy. He's doing a tremendous job promoting boxing and promoting his fighters. And I think, I criticize a lot of promoters for not making fights and trying to find a way, ways out. Eddie's doing the opposite. He's trying to figure out ways. How do I get this big fight made? Even if his fighter maybe is not so eager to take the next steps, Eddie's trying. And I really have to applaud him for that.
It tends to be kind of like a human trait, isn't it? Like when they're trying to climb the ladder, we're all behind them. And then when you reach the top, people just want to drag him back down, and it tends to be the case with Eddie, it seems.
Yeah, and I think, some of it is, it's like, okay, you see, if it's fighters, you see their flaws over the period of time. When you first see them, and maybe they have this great performance, you go, wow, and then you don't have a lot to evaluate. And then as time goes, and you get to evaluate them. But I do think that boxing fans are a lot of times really unrealistic on what they expect and what people can do. And the nonsense that's going on about Errol Spence is it's really sickening. I mean, think about it. And then with what Eddie puts up with, I mean, I don't think in boxing there's a better promoter in the world right now. I don't think there's a close second, to be honest with you. I think what Eddie is doing is phenomenal. And if I was a manager with a fighter, Eddie Hearn would be my first phone call, because I'm not saying it would depend on what division my guy was in and everything else, but Eddie Hearn would be my first phone call in all those cases, and because I love what he does, and I love the exposure that he gives to boxing in general, and specific fighters in particular.
I think it'll be one of those cases when Eddie eventually steps down, then we'll kind of realize what he actually did for the sport, and all the interviews, and how honest he was, and stuff like that, when he's eventually replaced by like Frank Smith and stuff like that. He does good interviews, but Eddie's kind of humorous, he's witty. At the same time, he kind of always gives you more information than he really should. So yeah,
100%. He knows what our job is, right? And he knows what he knows what the public wants to talk about, and he teases things, and he gets out there. And I mean, it's not easy doing what he does. Like on big fight weeks, I'll go out there and I'll get interviews, and I might have 4 and 5 interviews a day, for 4 days in a row, in addition to my own work. And I'm going, oh my God, how do I do this? And Eddie Hearn's getting it 7 days a week. He doesn't have an off season, right? It's not like league sports where you have an off season and you can go recharge for a couple of months. He doesn't have that. And I mean, he's accessible to people all around the world. He spends a tremendous amount of time. He's smart. He pays well for the fighter. So if you're a fighter manager, he's a guy that pays well. And he's given a lot of exposure. I mean, he's getting these fighters, in high profile situations. And, like I wasn't crazy when they first went to Saudi Arabia for the Joshua Ruiz fight. But that was a special event, and it got, I think, because of where it was and the uniqueness of the venue, it added to it and brought more attention to it. I think Eddie is fantastic.
No, I agree. Rounding off that DAZN card, Cash Farouk, 16-1 unanimous decision over Luis Gerardo Castillo, who dropped to 28-3. I think everyone says the same thing. Cash Farouk, brilliant to watch, great style. Just does he lack that pop to get to the higher ends of that division?
He strikes me as a guy, sometimes the way he fights, that might have hand problems. I've never heard him say that, but it seems like when he gets a lot of action, and then when he has that one shot that maybe there's the killer blow, and he pulls it, right, and you don't see him throw it. And I wonder if he has a high output type style. I wonder if he has hand problems. I've never heard him say that, but I wonder if he has problems with his hands, just because sometimes you wonder, okay, where's that next, next 1-2, or that next combination. But I think a pretty fun fighter, and a guy that I don't know that he's ever going to be a pound for pound champion, but I think he's going to be a guy that you put on undercards of big shows. And like, to me, and I'll tie in him and Eddie and the work that Eddie does. I think when you're putting cards together, especially these really big pay-per-view cards, what you want to do is you want to have on there, if we know all the hardcores are going to watch, right? All the boxing nerds, all the boxing heads are going to watch those fights. But we want to get the person who maybe's turned off by boxing and get them to buy it. And what you want to do is when they buy the show and they turn it on, you even if they haven't heard of these guys, say, oh man, that was a fun fight, right? And have them enjoy it, and not have a Rigondeaux type fight, right? And have a fight that, gets out there where, there's activity and all that. And that's what Farouk, I think, is a guy who fills that kind of niche, right? I think, you put him on, an AJ card, and he's a guy that, gives entertainment early in the show or early on the main card, and people like him. And so to me, I think he's a fun fighter to watch.
No, it definitely is. He's definitely someone, if you're kind of like a boxing purist and you have like a son or a fighter, you can tell him like, hey, watch Cash, because he does everything really, really well, but it just lacks that kind of pop to, back people up. And I'm just wondering if at the higher levels, is that really going to affect him, or we're just going to end up with a lot of, 12-round fights where he just wins on points. He just really outschools people. But you kind of get tired of watching it because every round's kind of the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, you want to feel like, hey, boxing's a game of attrition, right? And as you're landing and people, are getting hit, as the fight goes on, you want to say, okay, you've had a high output through the first 7 rounds. All right, now get them out of there. And they want to see that next level go. And I think if he does, but that's why I think he has hand problems, because, sometimes there are fighters that just don't have the power, and that just don't have the pop, and guys are willing to, but you don't see guys, just wading through his power, right? I mean, they're cautious of what he's doing. And so I kind of feel like sometimes, maybe his hands are hurting him. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's just the sense I've gotten in watching him, and, Floyd Mayweather was a guy that had bad hands early in his career. People forget Floyd Mayweather was a badass fighter, offensive fighter. And, then his hands gave him problems. And so he wasn't never the same offensively later in his career. And I wonder if that's the case with him.
Another fighter that people have been complaining about due to his output. So we're going to move to the Dignity Health and Sports Park in Carson on Showtime.
Let me wake up here.
Right. John Real Casimero moved to 31-4 with a split decision over Guillermo Rigondeaux, who dropped to 20-2. This was for the WBO bantamweight champion. Right, where do we start, Kevin? So, Twitter, the Twitterati have all been saying that, at last, Guillermo Rigondeaux has been exposed. All the media personnel have been so high in him that he was never that good. Look at his output over his last few fights. So where do you stand on this, Kevin, overall?
Well, I respect Rigondeaux as a great fighter, right? Let's start. Tremendous talent, and just nobody knows boxing better than Guillermo Rigondeaux. And, but the sport is hit and don't get hit. And when he faces a threat, and I think in the first round, when he went down there and then Casimero threw those punches when he was on the ground, and so they ruled no knockout, I think he might have felt Casimero's power and that. And so he decides, I'm not getting hit by this guy. And so he fights a fight where, you cannot compare him to Pernell Whitaker, because, which some people try to do. The Rigondeaux fanboys try to compare him to Pernell Whitaker. Whitaker would make you miss in the really bad ways, but he would hit you back and make you pay. And he wasn't necessarily hitting you with bombs, although Whitaker could, punch a little bit, but, you came out of a Whitaker fight lumped up because, you come out of a Rigondeaux fight looking like you went in. And I think that's his flaw. He doesn't want to engage. And I think sometimes, you have to do that to win some of these rounds. When he has a guy overmatched, then then he's a guy that'll throw and he knocks people out. And who was the fight? I can't remember now off the top of my head, where he got disqualified in the first fight, and then he came back and, in the rematch, and he blew him out. But Rigondeaux, that's the kind of guy that Rigondeaux will go after. But, it seems like, except for maybe Nonito Donaire, which I thought that was the kind of the key fight of his career, you don't see him fight that way against people who he knows can hurt him.
No, it's true. I think people forget as well. Remember what everyone was saying when he was going in to fight Lomachenko. They were completely split before the fight about how good, Rigondeaux was. And it's, ever since he lost that fight, people kind of just, throwing that completely aside out of their brains.
And I think that was an unfair fight because, you can make the argument that Loma was 3 weight classes bigger than him. And so, look, he just fought at bantamweight, and Loma just fought at 135, right? What does that tell you? It just wasn't a fair fight. And he was totally outgunned in that. And, that's kind of like, putting Canelo Alvarez in against Tyson Fury, right? You're just that many divisions up, and you scoff at it at, when you say it in that regard, but that's really what Rigo went through. So I would, give Rigo the benefit of the doubt in, like that fight. But against John Real Casimero, you have the skills and you have to be able to throw and land some punches, and you can't land 44 punches in a 12-round fight and expect to win and expect people to praise your performance. I mean, this is professional boxing, and offense counts and power of the punches counts. And it's not a game of just, running away and making people miss. And I just thought Rigo sometimes gets in love with that, making you miss by 10 feet, but he's not landing anything back. So are you really doing anything?
We probably have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's probably about 45 years old, maybe 50.
He's up there.
Right. Obviously, you stay in Vegas. Nonito Donair's, based in Vegas. Any news on whether, after Donaire probably fights Inoue, will we see Casimero, or is that now completely out of the window due to the social media beef that they had?
I don't think it is. I think it's still a possibility. I mean, I think they're going to have to, the sides are going to have to get together, and talk and look face to face. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding and things that kind of happened in that situation. And I wrote about that at the time. But I think everybody on both sides could have handled it better. And that was the fight we should have seen on Saturday, right? That was the fight we should have seen. Would have been a tremendous fight. And with, the Filipinos going at it. And then with Manny fighting the next week, I mean, there was really a hook to market that fight, very strongly. That would have been a tremendous battle. But I still think that is salvageable. And so hopefully we can get that done.
Do you think if Inoue, fights Donaire, Inoue beats Donaire, do you think it'll be Casimero Inoue, or do you think they'll just always do the Casimero Donaire because it's, like a big Philippine derby?
If I had a guess, I would think that you would see, especially because Top Rank is going to have a say in this, right? Because they have Noya. I think they're going to want to see Casimero fight Donaire, and the winner of that then emerge to fight Noya, and that be the guy that he fights. So to me, that makes the most sense, right? I mean, Inoue is now a pound for pound guy. I think Donaire certainly is close to that. He's not there. He's not there, but he's certainly close to that. But I think Noya, by what he has done and over the brief time he's been a pro, I think he's earned that right. So get those two guys to fight. And once we get a winner out of that, then he faces the winner. And to me, that's the best case scenario.
Is there any talk from Donaire's camp whether this will be his last fight if, he comes out second best to Inoue?
The last time I talked to Nonito, he did not indicate that was, there. But he is also a really thoughtful, introspective guy. I don't know if you've ever talked to him, but a really smart guy. And I think if he goes out there and, he has a bad performance, he might say, I've done enough, right? I mean, what more can he really do? You think of, what he's accomplished, and that knockout of Ubali was incredible. And, he's been so good for so long over so many different weight classes, that if he can't, and he reminds me a lot of Pacquiao. I'll fight anybody, right? Pacquiao said that he wants to fight either Crawford or Spence next. I mean, God bless Manny Pacquiao for that, and I wish so many other fighters had it. Nonito Donaire has that attitude, and I love it. And it's but I could see this, him saying, depending on how the fight with Inoue would go, you know what, maybe I've done enough. I've been here a long time. I've got my health. Let me get out of here.
Right. We wouldn't blame him. All the nights he's given us, all the stuff that he's done. First ballot Hall of Famer, I think, no doubt.
I mean, he's going to have my vote. I say that, but you always have to remember, you're limited on how many guys get in. Like, look at this year's Hall of Fame ballot. I mean, with all the guys who are on there, you were definitely excluding somebody who in most years would be a first, ballot Hall of Famer because of how many people you could vote for. So, I say Nonito is a first ballot Hall of Famer with an asterisk, depending on who he goes in with. Now, I can't imagine. I'm trying to think, who would he go in with that's retiring anytime soon that would, maybe push him down the ladder. I don't think that those are the guys that are out there. Most of them, the guys have just gotten in this class with, Mayweather, Andre Ward, Klitschko and the whole bunch. But I think, that I'll just put an asterisk on it. I agree with you. He deserves to be first ballot Hall of Famer, but it depends on who. Given the new rules they have, it depends on who he's on the ballot with.
Easy for me to say, Kevin, because I don't vote.
It's tough. Like you want to put out the best ballot you can put out, and you look at it and So I sat there this year and I said, okay, Mayweather given, Andre Ward given, and I look at Vladimir Klitschko. I mean, that long streak, he had, so he's in. Then you got Miguel Cotto, bingo, Miguel Cotto's in, and Tim Bradley was on the list, and Marquez, and I mean, there was so many guys you start looking at, and you're going, holy smokes! And with their new rules, and what is it off the top of my head? Is it 3 that are guaranteed to get in? It's like, holy shit! There's just way more guys than there are spots. And so, I think they make a contingency if you get over 80, if extra guys get over 80%, then they'll put those guys in. But, basically they put 3 guys in, and it's tough. I mean, because, there's some years, there have been years where I voted for 0. I said, in the category, I don't think anybody deserves to be in out of this particular group of fighters. And I haven't voted for anybody. I think I did that once in my 20-some years of voting, or with more than 20-some years, I guess it's been, close to 30 years now. But I think that, most years you're going to have a couple solid candidates, and the other one, you're going to have guys that are kind of like borderline.
Kind of getting off subject here, but I think sometimes do you find that it ends up being more of a popularity competition over kind of achievements, legacy, and substance?
Well, I do agree with that. And I think, but it also comes down to, if you're voting, you have an obligation to really know who it is. Now, here's the difference. Like if you're, you're in the baseball, going in the Baseball Hall of Fame, the statistics are out there, and you can just compare the statistics, and it's easy to say, okay, he's got better statistics than this guy, and this guy's in, and it gets in. But boxing is not a statistic-based sport, other than, I guess, W's, right? But like Sven Otke's never going to get in the Hall of Fame, and he retired at 36-0. And I would be stunned if he ever got in the Hall of Fame, and so, it's too bad. I mean, he was one of the best boxers of his time, right? And I think you can make an argument that he deserves to be in, but I think, what happens is, and we're all guilty of it. I'm not saying I'm not, but like the fighters that were in the era that I saw and I knew, you kind of tend to weight them better. And I try to look back and say, okay, how about these fighters that I didn't see, that I read about, and, try to learn more about them and who they beat. But it's really hard because, you're going back to boxers. And so if I look at a Sugar Ray Robinson's easy. I look, and he's fought all these big names, and you can tell. But sometimes you get some of these flyweights, and they fought a lot of fighters that, based in Asia that maybe, especially when I was growing up, we never saw flyweights or bantamweights, around, and we didn't have the kind of TV fights like you have now. You were limited on what you can see. And so those kind of fighters, sometimes can get a short shrift. And I think the voters really have to do due diligence to know who everybody on that ballot is.
Great transition there. You touched on the super flyweights. So for the top rank card, the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino from Oklahoma on ESPN and ESPN Plus. Joshua Franco moves to 18-1-2 with a unanimous decision, 12 over Andrew Maloney, who dropped to 21-2 for the WBA super flyweight world title. This was the end of their trilogy. I actually thought Maloney, looking at the second fight, I thought the way that Maloney started, I thought he was going to take this, but Joshua Franco really, kind of shut him out, didn't he, Kevin?
I picked Franco in my betting column because of what the odds were. Like, right. I sat there and I looked at that fight from every angle, and it was hard. There were times I was leaning toward Maloney, and then I was saying Franco, but then I looked at it and I think I got Franco at plus 200. And I'm going, that's just too big for a fight. This is a dog fight. This is a 50-50 fight, and so I said I got to take Franco here. I mean, he's too good of a fighter to be plus 200. And I'm not really sure how that line got up there so much. But he proved to be over the course of that series the better fighter. I mean, I think, you looked at the second fight with Maloney and you thought, hey, he's landing that jab. He's really being aggressive. He's really, getting home, and he's found a way to get through Franco's defense. But then, whatever success he had in the second fight certainly was not there on Saturday night. I mean, I didn't think he ever really had a breakthrough moment in that fight where you thought, okay, he's going to come through and turn the tide of the fight. He's a good professional fighter, and so he's not going to go away easily, and he didn't. But to me, there was never that moment, Michael, where I thought, okay, this fight's starting to turn, and here comes Maloney. And Franco just fought brilliantly. They call him the professor, and it was like, he taught a lesson to Maloney.
Yeah, looking at some of the interviews, before the fight, someone did an interview with him at the Robert Garcia's gym, and kind of reading between the lines, I think maybe he took too much time off before the second fight, and maybe ate too much and celebrated winning the world title a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So I think maybe just kind of nearly losing the world title due to the headbutt or punch, whatever people decided in the end, kind of shook him up, and you kind of like, I need to knuckle down to make sure I win, the trilogy fight, which he did. That gym, the Robert Garcia gym, I think we've spoken about it a few times on the show. Just breeding killers out of there. Whatever he's feeding them, whatever he's doing in there, the good sparring they have, Kevin, is unbelievable. Probably one of the hottest gyms in the world at the minute. You agree?
I do agree. I think it starts, Robert is a really good trainer. His father, Eduardo Garcia, doesn't train, fighters like he used to, but he's a really good boxing mind. And he's a guy that can, provide a lot of smart counsel. And if you bring him in the corner, give good advice and, in terms of, making adjustments during fights. But Robert's been awesome. He got the deal with Adidas. He's making it a gym that people want to go to. So he's attracting a lot of really good fighters. And I know, like in talking to Jose Ramirez, when he was looking to get away from Freddie Roach, Freddie had so many fighters, and then Manny was always his priority, that, he felt like he didn't, get the attention from Freddie that he needed. And, Robert figures a way to do it. If that means Robert working a 14-hour day, he works a 14-hour day. But he manages to figure out a way to get the guys at work and work on their skill development, and get them in shape and all that. And, I think if you look, especially now that Rios is kind of retired, I mean, he's a guy that his fighters make weight. His fighters, are ready to fight, and they fight at a very high level, and they make adjustments, and I think that, that's a tribute to them, but also a tribute to their trainer and Robert Garcia.
What is it you think that sets Robert aside, that, people move to that gym? And I think you touched on something earlier about, certain fighters want to go to certain gyms because of the style. But when you look at all the fighters that he has, it looks like Robert's actually able to, look at a fighter and then mold a technique and a style for each one. There isn't just like a cookie cutter.
I agree. I think, I mentioned Emmanuel Stewart before, and I think Robert is in that vein, and I think Freddie Roach is in that vein, right? But Robert's able to sit there and say, okay, here's what you're missing, in my opinion, and this is what I'm going to put in with you. I'm going to keep everything that you're doing in there, but we're going to work on some things. And, different guys have different needs. Some guys need to develop their skills more. Maybe they have the tools and everything, but their skills aren't just fully developed. He works and spends time at developing. He's a guy that, did I lose you?
No, I can still hear you.
Okay. And I think my battery is dying. So let me get my power cord here and so I think Robert's good at that, but I think Robert is also just a really, really, smart guy, right? And I think, he's a guy that knows the business, and he cares about his fighters. And, his son, Robert Jr., is learning the business and certainly is not an elite trainer ready to train anybody himself. But I think, between his father and his son, and himself, there's 3 guys in there that know the business and that are good. And I think that really makes a big difference.
I mean, I've been to obviously I don't live too far from Riverside, so I've been to the gym, several times, and it is good to listen to Robert kind of, tell the fighters about purses, tell them, not to waste their money on, partying,
Right.
cars, jewelry, and tell them to, to buy houses and invest. So not only is he a trainer, he's kind of like that father figure and, steers them down, a correct path that, will hopefully.
When you look at his brother Mikey, and Mikey's in real estate, and
Right.
Mikey is a millionaire outside of boxing,
Right.
and so that family is just a family that has their ish together, right? So you like what they're doing.
No, yeah, definitely. If you were a fighter, Kevin, or if you knew somebody a fighter, that's a gym that you would tell them to look at.
Oh, that would certainly be right up there on the top of my list. I mean, there's a number of trainers out there that I really like, and I think, are good. But I think, the Garcia Boxing Academy is one that you have to have on your list and get in there, because he has so many good fighters. You're going to get good sparring. It's great competition, in sparring and in the gym. You're going to get that one-on-one attention with one of the smartest guys in boxing. There's no doubt. I did an interview today with Stephen Breadman Edwards, breaking down the Pacquiao fight. I think Stephen is a really good fighter, a trainer, underrated. Doesn't get a lot of attention, but a really smart guy. Ismail Salas, who has Ugas, who's fighting Pacquiao this week. I think Salas is a guy that, for the Spanish-speaking fighter who has been having some problems. He can resurrect careers and get guys back. There's a lot of guys, but I think Robert Garcia has to be on every list when you're going out there to look for a new trainer. Whether you hire him or not is one story, but he has to be on your list.
A random question, but I asked somebody else in the UK, Nick Pete, who also covers boxing and MMA like yourself for BT Sports in the UK. If you had a young fighter that was, a boxer and an MMA fighter, with the knowledge that you have of covering both sports, which path would you tell them to follow? Would you tell them to follow boxing, or would you tell them to follow MMA, like towards obviously the UFC?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question, and I guess it's hard to answer that question without knowing the fighter, right? But I mean, knowing what the fighter's skills are.
Not for like skills, just in terms of, I don't know, what you think the best career is in terms of like money, exposure, just to build a career. Because obviously, I'm assuming, knowing what one could be substantially harder than the other.
What I would say is this, that if you're in MMA, if you get to be a mid-level MMA fighter, you're going to make a lot of money, a really good living. You're not going to get rich necessarily, but the UFC has a lot of fighters that make between, say, $80,000 and $250,000 a fight, and they fight 4 times a year. So you put that together, and all of a sudden they're making $250,000 to $1 million a year. Some of them pop a little higher than that, and so I look at it and I go, hey, if odds are my guy's not going to be a superstar, but if he gets out there and, he's just a mid-level guy and, he can get on the main card occasionally and, and win some fights, you have a chance to make that kind of money. Now, if you get into boxing and you become a superstar, well, then the bigger money is in boxing. But then if you're that mid-level guy, that opportunity is not there, right? I mean, it's, you don't make the kind of money that those UFC fighters make, and you don't get the opportunity to, a lot of times, to fight as often unless you have a really good manager who's really invested in you, which a lot of times, if you're a mid-level guy, not going to go up in boxing, those managers aren't necessarily, invested in you that much. And so in that case, then, you have to look at it and say MMA. So I guess if you're going to make me today say, I'm going to make the decision right now, I would say MMA, just because, the odds of any one individual fighter becoming a superstar are low. And so to get a fighter to, be in that mid-level game. And I realize if I did that, I'm rolling the dice. If I have the next Manny Pacquiao or the next Tyson Fury or, Floyd Mayweather, that I'm probably going to give up money that I would have. But I also look at it, hey, if, something happens and my guy just comes in, he doesn't exceed expectations, but he doesn't really go below expectations, just kind of comes in at the baseline, then I feel like, MMA-wise will pay more.
If I remember rightly, that was pretty much what Nick Pete said. Both of you pushed the fight towards MMA. Yeah. Which is funny because how often is it people complain about the pay, and Jake Paul's always giving, Dana White, crap for supposedly not paying, the fighters what they're worth. So,
I'll say this about pay, right? I mean, I'll say this across the board. Fighter pay should be higher. These guys take risks, but it is a business. And, let's look at Mayweather. When Mayweather fought Pacquiao, and I think I've told you this story on your podcast, he shows me his $100 million check that he got paid that night. And of course, we know he made 280 some million, I think, total for that fight. But there was a dude on that card that took every bit as much risk as Floyd Mayweather, who got a check for $1,500, right?
Right.
And that, that's just not right. And that, but these are sports that, are set by how much you pay. I mean, how much tickets you sell and how much attention you can get and help promote the show. And I think, some people, they don't really know what a lot of these UFC fighters make. Now, I'm not saying that I think the UFC can pay more. I'm not defending the UFC, but I'm saying that a lot of these guys make a lot of money. And I've talked to a lot of them about their salary because it's in the media a lot. And guys are saying, we're fine.
Yeah, it's funny because as well, when people see how much the fighters get paid, and I think there was a UFC fighter that released it this week about how much he got paid. I think it was like 250,000, but by the time everything had gotten taken out, you take home, boxing and MMA is going to be very, very similar, around 50%. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, it was Cyril Gahn that you saw.
Is that what it was?
He just won the interim heavyweight title. So he had fought, I think this was his 6th fight in the UFC. So he made a really fast rise. And he got paid $350 for the fight, paid his corner, paid his expenses, paid his taxes. And then he said he got $180. And so, it's tough. Now, UFC supplies the cut men. So, unlike boxing, they don't have to pay. Generally, that's not a big, huge expense, but it's a little bit, off the top. And they don't usually have to pay a second assistant like in boxing where, you usually will pay a cut man and a head trainer and then a second assistant. And usually in MMA, you have fighters in the corner and, you're not paying them, just, covering their expenses to go wherever the show is. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate for the fighters, and I would like to see fighters across the board in all sports make more. But I think we have to understand, too, that just because you choose to be a fighter doesn't mean that people should shower you with money. You have to produce and you have to create value for the people who have the money to give it to you. Right.
No, that's true. That's very true. I mean, it's entertainment, at the end of the day, it's sometimes you just have to generate the interest and get bums on seats, because I think we've said it many times on this show, how often is it you see, people like Alan the Bavage Savage and Dave Allen in the UK, their talent is pretty low, but they make up this persona and they get paid a lot more than they are. Whereas, Chocolatito, for how many years was he one of the greatest boxers on the planet, but he was in a very unfashionable, weight division and was probably getting paid peanuts.
I don't know what it is elsewhere in the world, but like in the United States, and I don't understand, and it's been all my life, fighters under about 130, 135 just don't get any respect, and people don't want to watch them. And in recent years, I'll give HBO and Showtime credit. They started showing them, and putting those fighters on. And so it's changed a little bit, and it's opened the door for somebody like Chocolatito. But even, we talked about Michael Carbajal getting that $1 million purse. There were not too many of those guys. And for whatever reason, the American public just rejects those smaller weight fighters. And I don't know why that is. And I wish that people, Chocolatito is one of my favorite fighters of all time to watch. Just an unbelievable pro. you're missing out if you're a boxing fan and you don't watch some of these guys like Chocolatito and Gallo Estrada, et al. You're hurting yourself and nobody else.
Right. Moving on to probably the best fight of the weekend, the Ford Center at the Star, Frisco, Texas on DAZN. Virgil Ortiz moved to 18-0 with 18 knockouts. TKO 8 over Kowalowskis, who dropped to 22-2-1. This was for the WBO International welterweight world title. Probably one of the best prospects in the world at the minute, or can we call him a prospect now?
If we say you're a prospect, if you've haven't won a world title or fought for a world title, then I guess he's a prospect. But I mean, right. He's just one of the best boxers in the world, period. End of story. I mean, Virgil really has it all. And I was skeptical of him, when he was 8-0, 9-0. I was like, hey, Golden Boy doesn't have a lot of other prospects. They're pushing this guy. And I watched sometimes, and, the competition he was fighting wasn't that great. I wasn't sure, but, in the last 4 or 5 fights, I've really come on to him. And I think Virgil Ortiz is a fantastic fighter. And on top of that, he's a fantastic kid. And a very marketable kid, and I think that, tremendous interest, loves music. If you go on Instagram and you follow him on Instagram, he does concerts sometimes. You'll see him, one night playing the guitar, one night playing the piano, singing. He'll do all sorts of different things like that. Just a fascinating guy and a really good fighter. And I'll tell you what, I would love to see him fight Crawford. I think Crawford, in my opinion, is arguably the best fighter in the world. And so you would have to favor Crawford, but you know what? Hey, look what Virgil did. Crawford didn't have an easy time with Kowalowskis, and Virgil went in there, and I thought really looked good against him, and he got buzzed. What was it? The first round or the second round? I can't remember. It was early in the fight. He got buzzed a little bit, and handled it very, very well. And I'll tell you what, nothing but good things to say about Virgil Ortiz. I think he is going to be a force for a long time. And hopefully he can make welterweight for a good long while, because I think a lot of good welterweights out there and a lot of fights for him that I would like to see.
In a strange way, do you think it was good that he got buzzed? Because, us as fight fans and as media, we like to see like, oh, okay, he passed that test.
Yes, and against who he did. He got buzzed by Kowalowskis, a guy that can hit. Right. If there's one thing you say about Kowalowskis, he's a guy that can punch. And, he got buzzed by him, but he remained composed, didn't, go all freaky and, everything and stayed within himself and got himself out of it. And, so I think as you're, if you're his manager, his trainer, you really love to see that. He proved to you, hey, when it's, the nitty gritty down and dirty, he's going to be able to survive. Now, I'm sure they knew that by seeing him in the gym and, what he had done through his amateur career. But, you're not going to see a lot of guys that hit as hard as Kowalowskis does. And he survived that. So, yeah, I think that was a real big testament to him.
Kind of moving on to the Terence Crawford fight. Do you think we'll see Virgil in with Terence, or do you think Terence is going to get in with Sean Porter after the WBO mandated that?
I do think that fight's going to happen, Porter and Crawford. But I think, it sets up good for Virgil because Virgil just fought. They'll fight fairly soon. And then they're going to be on somewhat of a similar schedule. Right. And so, assuming Crawford beats Porter, which is no guarantee. I think Crawford should beat Porter, but Porter is a tough, rugged guy, and he's not an easy out, right? That I think, then we'll see the fight. And I think Crawford wants that kind of fight, and especially with looking like Spence may not be in the picture anymore, at least for a while. Then I think, what are Crawford's real options? It would be Pacquiao. Pacquiao said today he wants to fight him, but there's no guarantee that Pacquiao does fight. Pacquiao just said, if I fight again, the two guys I want to fight are Spence and Crawford. But, he's going to run for president of the Philippines. That election is in May. And if he gets elected, how the hell do you have a head of state as a boxer in fighting? I was kidding with him today, and I said, if you get elected president of the Philippines and you come back to fight, would you challenge President Biden? He laughed at that. But So I don't know that he'll be able to fight if he's the head of state, but it would be fascinating to see. I'll tell you that.
Do you know, Kevin, if obviously, the rumor is that Terence Crawford contract runs out sometime around October. Late October?
Yeah.
Is the fight with Sean Porter, is that going to be via Top Rank? And does it look like he's heading to PBC?
Well, they're going to purse bid, right? And so I think that, and I don't think I think that was Top Rank strategy all along. I don't think that they wanted to promote that fight because I think they felt it was going to be an expensive fight to get done and probably a money loser. And so I think they were saying, hey, you know what, let's let the PBC let it go to purse bid. And if Triller wants to bid on it or, whoever, PBC, put it on Fox. And then great. And we'll see what we do with Crawford after that. But they have not had a lot of luck with Crawford nor Crawford with them. I'm surprised by that because normally Top Rank is really good about those kind of things, but they've just never been able to solve that puzzle with Crawford and get him the fights that make sense. And I think if I had to guess what happens, I think he ends up with the PBC at the end of the day. But I think there's going to be a lot of people, I think Matchroom will offer him some money. And so I think Crawford's going to be in demand. And, I think, you're looking at Matchroom and they're saying, hey, we need to get people on DAZN that can sell subscriptions. And, you have Canelo, but you don't have Canelo, right? He's a free agent each time. So you have to, be able to pull that off. And I think, Crawford will be a good guy for them to get, if they were to have him and they would have Canelo and Crawford, the two top pound for pound guys in the world. That's a pretty good, marquee to say, hey, look who we have right out here. And, and then you add AJ into that mix as well. And, they have a pretty good, so you can cover yourself. You have them each fight in the same quarter, a month or so apart. You give your subscribers pretty good. And that's, I think, what they need to do. So I think PBC is the likely landing home, but I wouldn't rule out Matchroom.
You touched on, obviously, Terence Crawford's one of your, high up on your pound for pound list. I think, wherever he lands, he really does need to get some names on, his resume before he retires. He's not getting any younger.
Right.
And, if the Sean Porter fight is made and he, manages to beat Sean would probably be the biggest name on his ledger.
I agree. And that's really too bad. I mean, now I'll give a little heat to Al Heyman here. Heyman had a lot of opponents that, would have lined up with Crawford from the time that Crawford became the undisputed 140-pound champ and immediately moved up to 147. Heyman had Thurman and Spence and Porter and Ugas and, all these guys. And I know there's somebody I'm missing, but a lot of good 147 pounders. And he could have made a cross promotional fight, but he, his way of doing business is, to try to squeeze the other guy. And I have all the leverage because I have most of the top guys, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to let you get a drink. And I think that, to me, that's wrong for the sport. And maybe it's good for your company. I don't even know how it's good for your company, but you have to think of the overarching sport. And we want these big fights, lift the entire sport up. When you have two really good fighters fight, especially in their prime, Hearns and Leonard, or Leonard and Duran, or Pryor and Arguello. You go back and you think of some of the great fights of the past. It helps lift the entire of the sport, and I think that's what a Crawford fight with any of those guys would have done. And I'll say I don't think Heyman did right by the sport of boxing by excluding Crawford from that. But by the same token, Top Rank has to take responsibility for that too. They signed him. They had this big platform on ESPN. That was how they got him to, when he was a free agent last time, to come back to them. Was this lure? Hey, we're going to put you on ESPN. We're going to get you all this visibility and make you a big star. That really hasn't happened. And, so I think both are at fault, in that. To certain degrees, and Terence is at fault. I mean, Terence can be miserable with the media. We talked about it before. He can be a grump and totally miserable. So he has to share some of the blame, even though his in-ring performances, which matters the most, is fantastic. So a lot of reasons, but I think it's really interesting to watch that unfold in the next couple of months.
Going forward in that division, obviously Virgil Ortiz and probably Jaron Ennis are the two guys to really look out for. From what we've seen so far, who would you see coming out on top when they eventually meet?
I like Ennis as a fighter, and I think Ennis is going to be an elite guy. I just think that from what I'm seeing of Virgil Ortiz, he is the entire package. And so if I can make this comparison to the Kings, right, and I would say Virgil is going to come out to be the Sugar Ray Leonard of that group, the star, or the guy everybody looks at, because he's got the good personality. He's got, the backstory, and he's the well-rounded fighter. He can box, he can punch. And so I see him as the Leonard. And maybe, you look at Jaron Ennis as the Tommy Hearns, and Tommy Hearns, one of the great fighters of all time. He had a couple flaws, and once in a while we saw Tommy, do the crazy leg in a fight, and, he lost fights that we didn't think he would end up losing, but still one of the greats. And so I think Ennis, I like him a lot as a fighter. I think he's not as advanced as Virgil too. So, Virgil's maybe just like a little, bit ahead of him in terms of development. So when Jaron kind of gets to that level, maybe we'll have a better basic comparison, but they both can crack. And right. Boy, what if we got them in there, what a fight that would be.
Virgil's obviously currently on DAZN, but he's obviously signed with Golden Boy. Any news on where they're going to land? I think, is it true that their DAZN deal's coming to the end? And obviously the rumor is that because of Oscar's kind of sided with Triller, they may end up over there.
I don't know what Triller is going to do. And I mean, I think Triller has their own issues. So I know Triller has a lot of money, right? But how long can they keep putting these nutty cards on that they're putting on? And, I mean, look at this show they got on September 11th. So they got Oscar De La Hoya against Vitor Belfort. So a 48-year-old and a 44-year-old in different sports. Belfort hasn't fought in 3 years. Oscar hasn't fought in 13 years. And you're selling that as a main event. Then you're coming back with the co-main event of Tito Ortiz, who was a wrestler in his MMA days, fighting Anderson Silva, who's 47 years old. And it's like, what? And a borderline. And then you got David Haye fighting. Now, Andy Foster told me, Joe Fournier, David Haye going to fight Joe Fournier. Joe Fournier's opponents have this wretched record. I mean, how is Joe Fournier considered anything? He's 9-0, fighting guys 11-41, and all these crazy marks. And God bless him, he's made money in this business, and don't tell me he's a guy that can fight a fighter like David Haye. David Haye is a legitimate world-class fighter. I know he's retired and hasn't fought in a while, many years. But I mean, David Haye, and plus he's bigger. Joe Fournier is like a 170-pounder, right. And David Haye, I mean, what the hell are they doing? And they're a boxing promoter. They're putting this garbage on. I mean, I hate it. And what are you giving the public for their money? I mean, freak show after freak show after freak show. I don't get it.
It's funny because like you touched on, they must have endless amounts of money, because in a recent interview, I think with IFL TV, David Haye, when the obviously the fight came around because him and Joe Fournier are friends, and they were kind of going back and forth of who would win in a fight now. And Fournier was saying, no, you're old, you're washed up, you've had too many injuries. And Joe Fournier knows Ryan Cavanier, spoke to Ryan Cavanier, and David Haye said that he turned around and said, I'm only going to do it if I get the same kind of money I got when I fought Tony Bellew, probably trying to price himself out. And Triller were like, okay. So that just goes to show you the amount of money they're throwing around.
Yeah, I think they're paying Tito Ortiz like $1 million to fight Anderson Silva. And as I say, Tito's not a boxer. I mean, he was never known as a boxer. He was a wrestler, a ground and pound guy. Boxing was his weakness. He was supposed to fight Dana White in a boxing match. And, most people who knew at the time were saying Dana White would win that, a boxing match, not an MMA fight. Tito would have broken his neck in an MMA fight. But, so that you're paying this kind of money. And so what does that do to the pay structure of all these sports? Plus, I think it does, it doesn't make boxing look good. It doesn't make MMA look good. Right. I mean, I'm all for people making money, and so God bless them. But don't ruin the sport for everybody else.
That's true. That's very true. Moving on to fight previews for next week. Saturday the 21st, T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas on Fox pay-per-view. Manny Pacquiao, 62-7-2, up against Yordenis Ugas, 26-4 for the WBA Super Welterweight World Title. Before we get into the fight itself, Kevin, can you just kind of tell us about when you first saw Manny and kind of the following his career? What's it been like for you?
Sure. I first saw Manny when he fought Lelo Ledwaba, and I've always been close with Freddie Roach. I covered Freddie when he fought. When Eddie Futch and I were very close when Eddie was alive, and Eddie, said to me, "Hey, Freddie's going to be one of the best trainers when I'm gone, so follow him." And so I, so Freddie and I have had a long and good relationship. And so I remember one time I saw Freddie in Vegas, and he was training James Toney at the time, and it was the week of De La Hoya Castillejo that was fighting in Las Vegas, and I said, "Hey, Freddie, I want to talk to you about James Toney." And he goes, "Oh, I got this kid now from the Philippines. You're not going to believe him. He's unbelievable." I go, "Okay, but I want to talk about James Toney." And he's like, "Oh, this guy." And I'm like, "What?" So I end up writing a story about Pacquiao because Freddie was so insistent of how good he was. And, Ledwaba was the favorite in the fight. And I had seen Ledwaba fight maybe 3 or 4 times at that point. And, I wasn't totally familiar with him, but I look at him as a guy, hey, pretty good fighter, pretty good pro, defending champion, figure he's going to win the fight. And just Pacquiao just starched him. And it was just the beginning of a long run. And I was talking to Pacquiao's PR person before I came down tonight, Michael. And we were talking about this before he fought Juan Manuel Marquez for the first time. He didn't even have a PR person at that point. And it was 2004, and his English was really, really bad. And I was interviewing him, and it was there was no interpreter, so it was like really bad. I'm trying to get something out of him. And he's wearing a red warm-up suit. And he's got a big McDonald's logo on the chest, and then he has McDonald's on the back. So I said to him, and I'm looking at his conditioning, and you remember back in those days, the six-pack that he had. He was just shredded. It was incredible. And so I said, "You don't eat that shit. Come on." He goes, No, I do. And so we were laughing. So after that fight, Manny had blisters, and it was a fight where there was the 3 knockdowns in the first round, and then it was so close the rest of the way. And there was controversy about, who won the fight. I went in the locker room to interview Freddie before the press conference. And so I'm standing in the doorway of the locker room, and I'm talking to Freddie, and Manny walks out, and he's limping. And he walks past us, and Freddie tells me, oh, he had the blisters. And then he starts to go up these steps that are down to the right in the MGM. And Freddie says, "Where are you going?" Now, remember, this is a young Manny Pacquiao. And, at this point, I've been covering him for 2 years, maybe. Doesn't speak much English. And so he starts to answer Freddie. Then he sees I'm there, and he turns around and he looks at me and goes, "I'm going to McDonald's." And I thought that was really funny, that he was smart enough to do that. And boy, that kid, he went from a young guy that was incredibly gifted to this, iconic fighter. I wrote a story today, 8 division world champion, 5 division lineal champion, and a champion in 4 different decades. For Canelo Alvarez to do that, he would have to keep fighting till 2041. When he would be 51 years old.
That's insane. Obviously, Kevin, you've been in and around the sport, boxing and UFC for a long time, MMA, sorry. When you sit down with people like Manny Pacquiao, Canelo, John Jones, can you tell, is there just like a different aura about them?
You can, almost all the time you can. They, these guys have that sense of confidence. And, I'll tell you a story that, that I think illustrates this. When Tyson was fighting Holyfield the first time, everybody knew going into that fight that Holyfield at one point had been great. So my colleague, Royce Fuhr, the late Royce Fuhr, that week, he covered Tyson and I covered Holyfield the whole week. So I was with Holyfield everywhere he went all week. And he was so confident. And I think in the media poll that was done, there was like 100 people that went in that media poll, and 2 people picked Holyfield. Ron Borges from the Boston Globe and Bruce Kyden from the Pittsburgh Press. Every single other person had Tyson because, they thought Holyfield was shot and, you know, and everything. And I remember saying, I didn't have the guts to pick Holyfield at the time. I remember saying to Royce, you know, I think Holyfield's going to win this. I mean, he is so confident, supremely confident, but I just, you know, it's Tyson on the other side. I can't pick against Tyson. And I ended up picking Tyson, but Holyfield came back and he showed, and that aura that you see in those guys, Holyfield showed on that day, you know, that you could just feel his confidence, and there was like this tranquility around him. Everybody's talking, Tyson's going to kill you, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And he just was so calm. And you see that, and you see it in a Manny Pacquiao, you see it in a John Jones, you know, and all those guys, there's something different about them. They're cut a little differently. They think a little differently, and you definitely notice that.
Have you seen a change in Manny? Because obviously, you know, when he first hit the scene, there was, you know, talks of him, you know, gambling and, you know, drinking, and then he turned to religion. And have you seen a change in him over those times?
You know, like I knew of those stories and I wrote about him. You know, like I was the one that broke the story when Oscar paid him I called it the golden suitcase. You know, he had signed with Top Rank, flew from the Philippines to the U.S. Oscar meets him at the L.A. airport and gives him a briefcase with $250,000 cash. And Manny took it and drove to a casino in Southern California and reportedly spent all the money that night. And I think probably more than reportedly, you know, but he, you know, got all that night. But we didn't have access to that side of him, right? You know, so we didn't see that side of Manny. You know, we're not, you know, he was not around where the media was around. So, you know, Manny was always the same guy to us. But what the difference in him now is that his English is so much better, and he understands and he can communicate his thoughts better. And so, you know, so many times, you know, there was interpreters that were involved, and, you know, it wasn't good. And now he's able to get his own message out and what he wants to say. And I'm going to write a story about this tomorrow, but I thought he was remarkable today. If people are watching and they can search for the media scrum that Pacquiao did after the press conference. I mean, he was phenomenal. And he talked about being a good person and all these different things. And he said he remembered when he had nothing, and, you know, didn't know each day today if he was going to be able to eat that day or not. So he doesn't want to make himself now feel like he's more special than anybody else. It was just a remarkable thing. And, you know, for people, if they can search that, it's really well worth watching it.
How many more fights do you think we have of Manny?
I think maximum 2. And here's what I think. He fights, and if he wins this fight on Saturday, and I think he will, you know, it's not a guarantee. You know, Ugas is a good fighter, and but I think Pacquiao will figure out a way to get the win. You might see him fight once more before the campaign, so maybe in October. So that would be, you know, 4 months. Now, I don't think Spence is going to be healed by then. You know, I don't think anybody knows at this point how long it's going to be for Spence, but I think it's unrealistic to think that Spence is going to go from that kind of surgery into a fight with Manny Pacquiao that quickly. So probably that's out. Crawford and Porter fight happens, you know, then that probably eliminates Crawford, you know, out of the mix. So who does Manny take? You know, who knows? But I think, you know, he would like to fight one more fight if he could. I just don't see, as I said earlier in the podcast, when he becomes the head of state, or if he becomes, you know, no guarantee he's going to win. I think I saw a poll from the Philippines that he was running like 5th or 6th among the potential candidates. So, you know, not that he would necessarily win the thing, but, you know, assuming he won, I don't see how a head of state could be an active boxer. I just don't see how you could pull that off.
Mikey Garcia still an option?
I mean, he said, somebody asked him today about Josh Taylor and fighting at 140 for the undisputed 140. He said, that's one of the only things you haven't done. Would you be willing to fight Josh Taylor? And he lit up and said, Josh Taylor's a great fighter. And, you know, but he didn't say yes, you know, right. But he did say, I could easily make 140. But, you know, so I think, having said that, I think that would make Mikey a possibility there. You know, the question is how much Mikey wants to, because, you know, they went down the road quite a bit. You know, Mikey signed with Paradigm Sports. Manny thought, you know, Paradigm Sports thought they had Manny signed. They invested a lot of time in trying to get a Mikey versus Manny fight done, which didn't happen. So does Mikey want to go now back and say, I want to go through that again? So we don't know. But, you know, I think that would be a fight that would make a lot of sense.
the exhibition with Conor McGregor's now dead in the water since those recent losses to Poirier.
And plus, Conor has a broken leg. He's not going to fight for probably a year, at which point, Manny's probably going to be done. So, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Turning the attention to the fight with Ugas then, all the rumors about Errol Spence, the car crash, and he was never the original opponent, all these conspiracy theories. I know you kind of screwed your face up there. I heard one today that, Spence was the opponent, but he was kind of always injured, and then the retina was worse than it was expected, and that was why they moved Ugas up, and that's Twitter for you, Kevin.
I mean, did you see Fabian Maidana's eye? He was supposed to fight. So they got lucky at the timing because Ugas was supposed to fight Fabian Maidana. Maidana then got thumbed in the eye, and then got a cut and had an unbelievable cut. I mean, it was just really bad. So he's out almost the same day that Spence was out. It came through. There was no, when he fought in Texas last time, Texas doesn't have the same requirements that Nevada does or that California does. And so they didn't require that ophthalmologic exam. And so he didn't have that test. So who knows? He could have fought Garcia with that. He could have suffered the retina in that fight, or he could have suffered the torn retina in his accident, or he could have suffered it, in sparring for this fight. We don't know. But even Pacquiao said today, he said, why would he do that? He said, you don't want to go out there and train as hard as he was training and put all that effort in and then not get paid and fake an eye injury. People are idiots. And it really bothers me because Errol Spence is a class guy. And, if there was some evidence out there that was the case, okay, but they're making this shit up out of whole cloth. And that bothers me because Errol Spence is a great representative of boxing and a classy kid. And he's done nothing but the right thing when he's been, of course, his accident and everything was not the right thing. But in the ring and boxing wise, what he's done. And to then cast that kind of aspersion on him, is just not right.
Obviously, there's the old saying, styles make fights. Do you think this is actually a harder fight stylistically for Manny because of the fact that Ugas isn't really a come-forward fighter where Errol Spence is?
I don't think it is. Spence is one of the 5 best fighters in the world and much bigger than Pacquiao, hits harder than Ugas, is quicker than Ugas, is bigger than Ugas. I just agree with you. I think Ugas does go forward, and I think that's what he's going to do against Pacquiao. I think he's not your traditional classic, jab right hand type guy, but I think he's not like the typical Cuban, right? Joel Casimero, when he was training him, tried to develop him into that, typical Cuban style. And Ismail Salas said, you know what, that's not who you are. And took a lot of that out. And I think what you're going to see, if my guess is right, if you're going to try to see him walk Pacquiao down. You look what he did against Sean Porter, right? You saw Porter backing up at times in that fight. And I think, he's going to know this is his one big shot. And, for some reason, the Cuban fighters are the one guys, Cuba develops so many great fighters, but as pros, they never connect with fans, right? And so we rarely see the Cuban fighters become these, huge stars in boxing. And, he speaks little English, he's already lost 4 times, which shouldn't disqualify him. But in modern boxing, it does, you know how that goes. People, he's already lost and all that. And so I think, that he knows this is his big opportunity. You beat Manny Pacquiao and the world is your oyster. You lose this fight and you're pretty much out of the mix. You're just an opponent at that point. And so I think it's, I think we'll see his best effort.
One of the, I can't remember which time it was, last time you came on, maybe the time before, I remember you saying that you're good at predicting the pay-per-views. Where would you ballpark this one?
300, something like that. I think, 250 to 300. I think if it was Spence, it would have gotten up to about 400. But you see a lot of people were turning in their tickets. They were not happy with the change. Spence was an opponent that, they thought it was an elite fight, and Ugas not necessarily an elite fight. And so, I think this is, not going to come out to be one of Manny's better pay-per-views, right. And with the uncertainty, going on with the coronavirus of what might happen too, I think that adds to it. So I think we're looking at around, 300 would be my guess.
Talking about elite fights, probably the real main event. Victor Ortiz is back, 32-6-3 against Robert Guerrero. I remember I turned on BoxRec and I saw this, a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was a mistake. I didn't know Victor Ortiz and, the Ghost were coming back. Are you a fan of this, Kevin, or is this kind of, just sad to see they're trying to get another payday?
This is borderline Triller-esque, right? I think it has a chance to be fun if both guys go for it, because, their skills are going to be diminished. So their defense is not going to be very good. Guerrero's always been an aggressive guy, and if Victor says screw it and decides, I want to knock Guerrero out, it could, it's not going to be skillful boxing. It's not going to be two of the best fighters in the world fighting, but it might be a fight. Might be, Now Victor also can make stinkers, right? And it depends on what, Victor's doesn't think like most people do. How does he approach the fight? And who knows how he's going to approach it. He's got a lot of things on his plate. So we'll see. But I wish it weren't happening.
It's kind of funny, like when you touched on earlier about how a lot of the time when you get like a big main event, the undercard, all the money kind of goes to the main event, and the undercard is kind of sucks. And this is kind of one of those examples. When you look on the undercard, a lot of like kind of, debuts and people coming through 2 or 3 fights. You don't really know many of the names. So it's kind of really just tuning in for the main event.
I remember this was when Mayweather and De La Hoya were going to fight, and I spoke to Richard Schaefer, and it was right before they had announced Marquez Vasquez won. And I said, Richard, you should put that on the Mayweather De La Hoya undercard. And my argument to him was, there's going to be a lot of people who will watch Mayweather De La Hoya who haven't watched boxing in 10 or 15 years. And if they see Marquez and Vasquez, who two guys are going to kill each other, fight, you're going to turn them back into boxing fans. They're going to say, this is what boxing is. And you're going to turn them back into boxing fans. And his argument to me at the time, it costs too much money. I can't do it. Now they ended up selling 2.5 million pay-per-views. It was, what was it, a $400 million gross fight? Of course they could have done it, and it would have been the right thing, for the sport. And I think, penny wise, pound foolish a lot of times. And I think, but here's the other thing, and the UFC proves this. You want to make evenly matched fights, and you want to make fights that are going to be fan friendly on those undercards, right? Instead of, trying to get a prospect to win and a showcase. Because what are showcases? If you knock somebody out in one round and like that's not doesn't deserve to be in the ring with you, it doesn't do anything. But if you go, you don't have to put the best fighters in the world on there. Put good quality fighters who come to fight, and match them with somebody who has a similar, style, attitude, and let them go at it. And guess what? All of a sudden you have really good competitive fights on the undercard that don't cost you a lot of money. And people say, hey, you know what? If I buy that Pacquiao Ugas card, I'm going to see 5 or 6 good fights. Right now, they're going to be, most people say, and hey, I know this is a Las Vegas thing more than anything else, but I guarantee you half an hour before Pacquiao walks that ring, it'll be 70% empty at T-Mobile Arena. There'll be nobody there, maybe more than 70% empty. Now, everybody will flood in right before, the main event, and it'll be crazy right before the main event. But is that really how it's supposed to be? And do we want the fans coming for one fight, and do we not, give people something for their money? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to put on Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence on the undercard, right? Put entertaining quality fights on, and that are evenly matched, and people will recognize that.
No, that's true. I mean, I've been to a lot of fights, obviously, paid and, through media and stuff like that. It is surprising when you turn around and, you're watching like the 3rd or 4th fight and the arena is completely empty. And then people just show up for the main event, and, it's kind of, you feel sorry for some of the fighters. You know, they're not that far down the card, but there's nobody there to watch them. You're looking around, and it's
When Don King started, when MGM opened, and they did a deal with Don King, and so King provided a ton of fights to MGM in the early days of the MGM Grand Garden, and he had such a deep roster then. You would see Ricardo Lopez fighting at 4:30, 5 o'clock, right? One of the great fighters of all time. And they would have 8 championship fights on the card, and there was championship fights going on at 3 in the afternoon. And there was literally, like, if you coughed, everybody in the place could hear it, and some of the greatest fighters ever, had that. And it's just ridiculous. And I think it comes from years and years of neglect. And, people don't want, they are so, you have to spend money to make money. And, maybe we have to rejigger the pay system a little bit so that the people at the top take a little less and the people in the middle and the bottom get a little bit more. But then you can afford to make some undercards that, that get people. Now, they'll tell you research says that undercards don't sell, and that may be true. But my argument to that is because people know that they traditionally suck. But if all of a sudden, let's say starting with Pacquiao Ugas, the media writes out, oh my God, this undercard was the best undercard in years. And then next week it happened, and the week after that it happened, and the Usyk AJ fight had happened. All of a sudden, the fans are going to start paying attention to it. And you make the sport better, and you invest in the sport, and you can't expect to get an immediate return on every single investment you make, but eventually long term it'll pay off. But nobody's willing to do that in boxing. These boxing promoters, they want to take the absolute grab all the money right away as opposed to investing back in it.
Talking about making the sport better, you wrote a recent piece for Yahoo Sports, looking into the sanctioning bodies and how to fix it. If you could just give us a quick lowdown on that.
Yeah, the WBA has really, ruined boxing to a large degree. I mean, they have so many champions, and it's hard to understand what's going on there. And the sanctioning bodies as a group. So I made a few suggestions, and I said, hey, look, there's no overriding authority anywhere in boxing. Each country has some level of authority, but they're not all powerful authorities, and so I said, if we can get some, agreement with the sanctioning body. So number one, and I think the ratings are always so important. Rate the champion. So, and I use Crawford, right? Crawford and Spence. So, the WBC and the IBF have Spence as their champion. Well, why isn't Crawford the number one contender in those groups, right? I mean, he should be. And if he doesn't want to take the fight as the mandatory, then you move on to the next guy. But, if you make the rankings better, it's going to lead to better fights, So I think that is it. And I'm saying get rid of all these extraneous championships, get rid of the gold title and the super title and have one championship. And so I'm okay. I would rather not have, 4 champions in each weight class. But if each organization had one champion and then they encourage unifications, that's okay. Because now, say, hey, we got the WBC champion fighting the WBA champion and the WBO champ fighting the IBF champ, and we're going to get big fights out of this, and we're going to wind up with a guy that we know is the best in the division. But the way the system works now, let's see what happens to Jack. I was going to say Jack Catterall, Josh Taylor. He just unified the belt. All these mandatories are going to come at him. And you already have Gervonta Davis out there has a WBA belt the week after Josh Taylor, or a month after Josh Taylor unifies the division. The WBA gave a title to Gervonta Davis. I mean, and so it just creates confusion in the marketplace. And I'm just proposing simple, easy to implement rules on the part of the sanctioning bodies that would get rid of some of that, all that, and maybe make this, help the sport out.
Have you ever, reached out to the sanctioning bodies, ideally the WBA, since they're obviously the worst at it?
I talked to Gilberto Mendoza said to me last week, I've been talking to you more than I talked to my wife. And I had a number of stories on that situation. And the thing is, I'll give Gilberto credit, he knew there was a lot of heat out there. And he answered my questions. And when I talked to him on the phone, this was not an easy interview for him. And I was blasted him. And then, I blasted him in my story. But I I did give him a chance to explain his side of the story. And I think that's why he spoke to me, because he knew that I would give him a chance to explain his side of the story. Now he's saying, that I recognize the damage of some of these actions that we've done. And so they've already started the process of removing some titles. So they've started to do that. They have he showed me a draft that certainly was not ready for publication, but he showed me a draft of their policy that they're going to have and that they think is going to be in effect by September 1. And, it's going to basically look to, get rid of everything but the regular champ. He's going to keep the super champions, but not name new ones, I believe. Now that could change, but when I talked to him, that was the thing, we're not going to name new super champions. So eventually they'll grandfather out if he stays with that. And then we'll just have the one champion across all the weight classes. So, the WBA has a pretty sordid history. And so I don't want to sit there and tell people listening to this that I expect it all, peaches and cream with the WBA and they're going to do everything right from now on. But I think, I'm optimistic that there'll be some positive change. They suspended the racist judge. Right. Her score was wrong. I think the scores of all three judges in that Michael Fox, Gabriel Mastery fight were incorrect. But I think more significantly was, her racist views that she espoused. And now you have a black fighter fighting. And, he said, hey, I never had a chance. And you know what? He's right. I mean, and that's not fair, and you're literally risking your life and you're going in the ring. If you knew you had no chance to win, would you go in there? No. Right. And he basically had no chance. The DAC was stacked against him going in the fight. So, hopefully, like she's done, we're never going to see Gloria Martinez Rizzo again. And I think that, and one of the other things is I said that the sanctioning body should all have no role in appointing judges and referees or recommending them. Just nothing to do with it. It all be the local commission that should do that. Right now, like in the U.S., the major states don't, they'll let them give recommendations, but they never pay any attention to it, and they appoint their own. But like some of those, lesser boxing states that don't do a lot of boxing, like Minnesota, they will take the recommendations, and Minnesota did in fact put the slate of WBA officials in that Gilberto Mendoza recommended for that fight. So I just think, that's another thing that's important. Don't let the sanctioning bodies have any, say in who should be officiating the fight so they can affect the outcome.
I know the sanctioning bodies have kind of touched on before that, some of the promoters, Matchroom, for example, or Golden Boy, ask for these belts because they think that it's going to bring more viewers. Do you think that's the case when you compare it to the UFC that only has, one world title per division? They may have an interim, but they actually use the interim the way it should be. Right. When the champion's back from injury, then the interim and the world champion fight, and then the interim disappears.
Yeah, I do think that's true. Like, I think Tom Brown at the PBC likes having those, title fights, as opposed to saying it's just a welterweight fight. It's a welterweight title fight, right? It comes down really to TV, because the promoters all know that TV likes to, advertise championship fights. I think they got to condition the TV networks that we don't need championship fights, we need good fights. Right. And that's where it really has to start. And I think if it's, boxing can be an exhilarating sport and it can draw good ratings if done correctly. Like, look at the Lomachenko-Lopez fight did, over 3 million viewers. And, it did great on streaming as well. So there was a lot of positives that came out of that fight. That is what can happen if we get to a situation where, we reduce the number of champions. That'll increase the visibility of all the champions, because, now all of a sudden, instead of wondering who the hell the champion is, you go one, and right now, with the WBA's explosion of champions, you could have 10 champions in one division, across the board. So I think that, in my opinion, I think that TV, if they work with the promoters, I do think the sanctioning bodies have a point. It's one of the few fair points they make. But I think, you say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you this, that's not a title fight. We're not going to, our title belt has to mean something. and it doesn't mean anything if you give it to every Tom. If you and I are fighting for a title belt, then that title belt is worthless, right? And so and that's basically what they're doing, is having guys one step better than you and me fighting for titles.
I know the Boxing News in the UK, the oldest fight magazine, I believe. The Fight Disciples are one of the biggest sports podcasts based in the UK. They've kind of combined and said that they're not going to recognize, the regular champions and the super champions, the gold champions. They're only going to recognize, one of them for, so when they're writing pieces or when Boxing News is, talking about them now, they're only going to recognize one of the champions per division, per belt. And also the Boxing News also went on to now just use the transnational boxing rankings as their rankings as well. Do you think we'd ever see like ESPN, Yahoo Sports, take a similar role if they listen to somebody like yourself, where they decide, just for recognition, we're only going to recognize one person and we're not going to, write about a gold champion or a regular champion? Because, people who come to the spot, I'm sure you have friends who chat to you and they must get so confused when you are saying we have 4 WBA world champions in one division.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I don't see it. And so I have a lot of problems with some of this going on, some from a journalism standpoint. But my job is not to make the news. My job is to report the news. So if I'm ranking fighters or if I'm recognizing or not recognizing, now what I can do, what I have the ability to do is just, when I write about the fight, if it's for a BS title, I can just say they're fighting for a minor title, and don't give it any more credibility than just that, a minor title, period, end of story, and go on. So that is kind of my, how I want to default to it. And I understand, like I understand and I agree with the sentiment about, not recognizing them. And the WBA in particular is really heinous. I mean, they are really, really bad. And so, for what they've done, I understand it. But I think that gets us into the business of making the news. And then, we'd have to look up and down the line, but like, isn't AJ the WBA champion? So all of a sudden now we're not going to recognize AJ as the heavyweight champion. Right. And it gets into I think there's a really tough line there that you have to cross. And so, we don't have to give them a lot of credibility. We don't have to give them a lot of attention. I don't see why media, I'll see, and I want to say, I think the WBC is the best of all of them. And I think Mauricio Suleiman has done a lot to clean up the WBC and make it better than it was under his father's term. I think I give Mauricio credit, but, I'll see media just surrounding them. They should be news sources for us, right? I mean, who cares what they're doing? And I think, let's talk to the fighters, let's talk to the trainers, let's talk to the promoters who are putting the fights on, the managers, but we don't need to talk to the sanctioning body heads, and it's just a piece of news, right? And as far as rankings are concerned, like the UFC, approached a bunch of us a few years ago. Bellator did this year about voting in their rankings, and I refuse to do it, and most of the credible reporters refuse to do it because they're using those rankings then to make fights, and it's affecting the fighters' livings, right? I don't want to be having if my rankings are affecting this fighter does good and that fighter does bad, or vice versa. I don't want to have that. That's not my job. So I'll report on what the rankings are and whatnot. And, I mean, it's never gotten to that, but if I ever said, hey, the UFC rankings are so bad, I would write a column criticizing it, or the Bellator rankings are so bad, I would write a column criticizing it. But I just don't think it's our role. And I don't think the media, so even this transnational board, when it was formed a number of years ago, I was approached about being on that. And I just don't want to be involved in that business at all. Like I think for fun on my own site, I can rank the top pound for pound fighters. That's a totally different story than actually ranking each division up and down. And I think that that's something that, media should get away from. And I think you're seeing that in the AP poll. A lot more outlets are not doing the polls, and you see in say the baseball awards, some of the baseball writers are no longer voting, and so because players have bonuses if they win the Cy Young or if they win the MVP, and so you're seeing some people back off doing that for that very reason.
I never thought of it that way. It's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I think about that.
Because I want people, if people think I know something about boxing or they think I know nothing about boxing, I don't care about that. What I care about is that they know that what I'm saying is my opinion from the research that I've done, and that my opinion is not bought and paid for by anybody, that it's just my opinion. Right or wrong, it's my opinion. And I want them to believe the news that I write. And if they think that I have this dog in this fight and that dog in that fight, it clouds that water, right? And I don't want that to ever be the case, and so, my obligation to my readers and what I promise my readers is that I am always going to think of the readers first and put their interests first. And when I report, I'm going to report as honestly as I can. And when I say as I can, I'm always going to be 100% honest. I'm going to report the best facts that I know at a given time. Sometimes people tell you lies, or, you talk to multiple people and 3 people tell you one thing and 2 people tell you another thing. And, you're trying to come out, but you try, our job is to a large degree, hey, let's report the best facts as we know them at a given time. And if you do that, you stay out of trouble. And I think you have the respect of your readership and of your audience. And so that's my thing. And that's why I don't want to be involved in those ratings and all that. Because then you're getting in, and yeah, you can say, oh, do I know who the 25th best flyweight in the world is? And I might've seen some of these guys fight once, right? And how am I fairly rating them?
No, that's true. Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons we like having you on, Kevin. I think you and Dougie are our most consistent people as guests, because you don't, sit on the fence and you give us your opinion. That's what we like, and that's what our listeners like. You don't have like a dog in the fight, like you said.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I always, I don't pretend to know everything, but I've covered boxing. I got a full-time job covering sports when I was in college, when I was 19 years old. So I've had a full-time job in journalism for 42 going on 43 years. And I've covered boxing every one of those years, sometimes small, sometimes big, but I've always been covering boxing. And so I feel like I've learned something over that period of time. So, I'm not saying I'm the sharpest boxing guy out there, but I know my opinion does come from talking to the top people in boxing and picking their brains. And I just try to be fair and honest. And, whether it's a person that I like or a person I don't like, I try to say what I believe to be A, accurate, B, fair, and C, honest.
Yeah, I think personally, if even if I don't agree with what somebody says, if they back it up with something, I'm like, okay, right. I can see where you're coming from. I don't agree, but I can see where you're coming from.
Correct. Yeah. And it's like making picks on fights, right? Now that's a little bit different, but we're out there. And if I say, hey, I think, so-and-so is going to win a fight. Here's why I think that's going to happen. You say, okay, I can see that scenario, but I think this is going to happen. But what we got to, what you were talking about before with the Errol Spence garbage, this stuff gets out, and then there's people that are quote unquote reporters that put that out. Come on. And you're ruining guys' reputation. And, than any of these people, I know most of it is fans, right? But there are, some so-called reporters that are out there doing it too. And I just, I just think that's wrong.
No, I agree. Well, Kevin, thank you for giving me, I think, an hour and a half of your time tonight.
My voice is losing it, so
if you just want to tell everybody where they can find you on social media, where they can find all your written work.
My work is all on Yahoo Sports. And so you can follow me there. On Twitter, I am Kevin I at KEVINI. And on Instagram, I am Kevin Iole, KEVINIOLE.
And we are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. And be sure to join us next week. We'll be talking about the Manny Pacquiao and Ugas fight. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is the Last Round Podcast.